On April 7, 1945, above the skies of southern Germany, a new kind of aircraft tears through the spring air. The sound is unlike the familiar roar of a piston engine. It is sharper, more mechanical, almost unnatural. Beneath its swept wings, the Messerschmitt Me-262 is moving at a speed Allied pilots are struggling to comprehend. For the men flying it, this is supposed to be the answer to Germany's desperate air war. A fighter fast enough to outrun enemy aircraft, armed with four 30mm cannon, and powered by revolutionary jet engines, the Me-262 appears to belong to a different age of aviation. But there is a problem. The aircraft may be faster than almost anything in the sky, yet Germany is running out of the one thing that keeps it there: fuel. By 1945, the Luftwaffe does not simply need a better fighter. It needs an entire system capable of feeding, maintaining, and protecting that fighter. And Germany's collapsing industry can no longer guarantee any of those things. The Me-262 has arrived too late, in a country whose resources are disappearing even faster than its enemies. The mystery is not why the jet was revolutionary. It is why revolution alone could not save Germany's air force. By the summer of 1944, Allied air superiority over Europe is becoming overwhelming. American heavy bombers are penetrating deep into German territory, protected increasingly by long-range fighters such as the P-51 Mustang. British and American aircraft are attacking railways, factories, fuel plants, and transport networks. The Luftwaffe is suffering from a devastating combination of experienced pilot losses, damaged infrastructure, and shortages of aviation fuel. Germany needs something capable of breaking the Allied advantage. The Me-262 offers exactly that possibility. Its two Junkers, Jumo 004 turbojet engines allow it to reach roughly 540 miles per hour, or about 870 kilometers per hour, depending on altitude and conditions. That makes it dramatically faster than the piston-engined fighters of the period. The standard fighter version carries four Mk-108 30mm cannon in its nose, giving it enormous destructive power against heavy bombers. Yet the technology comes with a price. The Jumo 004 is revolutionary, but it is also fragile. Early engines have short service lives, and German industry struggles to manufacture them consistently as Allied bombing intensifies. The engines require careful handling, and the aircraft itself demands trained ground crews, spare parts, runways, and fuel supplies. And fuel is becoming Germany's greatest strategic weakness. The Allied bombing campaign against synthetic oil plants and refineries has devastating consequences. By 1944, and especially in 1945, aviation petrol is increasingly scarce. Aircraft can exist in factories, but pilots cannot fight if their machines cannot be fueled. The Me-262's story begins years before it enters combat. Development of the aircraft dates back to the late 1930s, when Messerschmitt engineers began exploring the possibilities of jet propulsion. The prototype eventually flies under jet power in July 1942. But development is slowed by technical difficulties, engine problems, and the enormous challenge of creating a reliable operational jet aircraft. The machine itself is remarkable. Its swept wings are not simply an aesthetic choice. They help the aircraft operate effectively at much higher speeds than conventional straight-wing fighters. The airframe is powered by two Jumo 004 engines mounted beneath the wings. Each engine produces only around 1,980 pounds of thrust, roughly 9 kilonewtons, but together they propel the aircraft into a speed range that contemporary Allied fighters cannot easily match. The Me-262 is also built around a simple but terrifying idea. Get close to an enemy bomber at extraordinary speed, fire its heavy cannon, and disappear before the enemy can react. A typical four-engine bomber might survive numerous hits from machine guns or smaller cannon. The Mk-108 was different. Its 30mm shells were designed to deliver devastating explosive force. In theory, a short burst could cripple a bomber. But turning that theory into a reliable weapon of war is another matter. The first operational Me-262s begin appearing in 1944. On July 25th, an Me-262, flown by Major Alfred Schreiber, encounters an Allied reconnaissance aircraft over Germany. The engagement does not produce a confirmed victory, but it marks one of the first combat encounters involving the new jet. Soon, operational units begin receiving the aircraft. The most famous is Kommando Nowotny, named after the Austrian fighter ace Walter Nowotny. In October 1944, the unit operates from bases including Akmer and Hesepe in northwestern Germany. Nowotny himself flies the Me-262 in combat, but on November 8, 1944, he is killed after taking off during an engagement with American fighters. The jet has demonstrated its potential, but it has also exposed its weaknesses. Takeoff and landing are particularly dangerous. At low speed, the Me-262 loses the enormous advantage it enjoys in the open sky. Allied pilots learn that the jet is most vulnerable while approaching or leaving an airfield. To counter this, German commanders organize fighter cover around jet bases. The aircraft is fast, but it still needs a runway. It still needs trained mechanics, and, above all, it still needs fuel. If you're enjoying this journey through history, subscribing genuinely helps us continue bringing remarkable true stories like this to the channel. By early 1945, the Me-262 is becoming increasingly important to Germany's hopes of defending its skies. Adolf Hitler has also insisted that the aircraft should be developed as a fast bomber, delaying its concentration as a pure fighter. Although the precise influence of Hitler's decisions on the program remains debated by historians, there is no doubt that the aircraft enters service during a period of severe organizational confusion. The comparison with Allied aircraft reveals the strange position of the Me-262. The American P-51 Mustang could not match the German jet's top speed. The British Gloster Meteor, Britain's first operational jet fighter, was also broadly comparable in concept, but it did not normally meet the Me-262 in combat because British authorities deliberately restricted its operations over mainland Europe until the final months of the war. The Me-262 therefore possessed a genuine technological advantage in speed. But speed was not enough. The Allies possessed enormous advantages in fuel production, pilot training, logistics, and industrial capacity. Germany could build an extraordinary aircraft, but it could not produce and operate it on anything approaching the scale necessary to reverse the air war. Exact production numbers vary depending on how incomplete airframes and partially finished aircraft are counted, but more than 1,400 Me-262s were ultimately produced. Yet only a fraction were operational at any one time. Many remained grounded because of shortages of engines, fuel, spare parts, trained personnel, or functioning airfields. By April 1945, the situation becomes desperate. Germany's transport network is collapsing. Allied armies are advancing from west and east. Fuel depots are being destroyed or captured. The Luftwaffe is struggling to keep conventional aircraft flying, let alone sustain a new generation of jets. Some Me-262 pilots still achieve remarkable results. Units equipped with the aircraft attack Allied bomber formations, and the jets prove extremely difficult for escorting piston engine fighters to intercept once airborne. Their arrival forces Allied commanders to adapt tactics, including concentrating attacks on known jet bases and protecting vulnerable aircraft during takeoff and landing. But the scale is simply wrong. The Me-262 is a weapon designed for a war Germany can no longer supply. Its historical significance, therefore, lies not merely in how many aircraft it destroyed, but in the gap between technological possibility and military reality. The jet demonstrates what aviation is becoming, yet it also demonstrates something more fundamental. Advanced technology cannot exist independently of fuel, factories, maintenance, pilots, and time. In the final weeks of the war, Me-262s continue to fly from increasingly threatened bases. Some aircraft are hidden, relocated, or destroyed to prevent capture. Others are abandoned as Allied forces advance. When the war in Europe ends in May 1945, the Me-262 survives as one of the most important technological legacies of the conflict. Captured examples are taken to Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, where engineers study the aircraft and its engines. The lessons learned from German jet development influence the rapidly developing post-war world of military aviation. Surviving Me-262s can still be seen today in museums, including preserved aircraft in the United States and Germany. They remain physical reminders of a machine that arrived at the threshold of the jet age while its creators were running out of everything required to use it. Return now to that spring sky of 1945. The Me-262 rises from a German airfield, its engines screaming as it accelerates into the wind. For a few moments, the aircraft appears almost untouchable. It is faster, more heavily armed, and technologically ahead of the fighters chasing it. But beneath the aircraft is a collapsing nation. Behind the runway are damaged factories, broken railways, and dwindling fuel reserves. Somewhere on the ground, mechanics are fighting to keep engines alive. Pilots are waiting for aircraft that may never be ready. Across Germany, the industrial system that created the jet is being dismantled by war. This is the central tragedy of the Me-262. It was not a failure of engineering, quite the opposite. It was one of the clearest demonstrations of what engineers could achieve at the dawn of the jet age. Nor was it completely irrelevant on the battlefield. When properly operated, the aircraft was genuinely formidable. Its speed and armament presented the Allies with a threat they could not simply ignore. But the Me-262 could not solve Germany's larger problem. A revolutionary fighter still requires fuel. A powerful engine still requires factories. A skilled pilot still requires training. And an aircraft that can outrun every enemy cannot outrun the collapse of the system supporting it. The men who flew the Me-262 trusted its extraordinary speed because, in the air, that speed was real. Yet by 1945, Germany's greatest enemy was no longer simply the aircraft approaching from the west. It was the shortage of time, resources, and fuel beneath them. The Me-262 arrived as a glimpse of the future. Germany simply did not have enough future left to use it.